will tell us how to become a śāntamūrti, both Bodhas and why to.
I'll make two apologies. First one from keeping you from your next cup of coffee. And this one, that I'm actually not going to talk about anything related to Japan. I've just arrived a couple of weeks ago to start a 2-year postdoc. So I have nothing to tell you about my project about transglobal yoga in Japan. But I invite you to check it out. yogascapesinjapan.com is my website. And I also have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, all these things in social media. So hopefully next year at this conference I have a bit more to tell you about the consumption of yoga-inflected lifestyles in Japan and how that relates to the global consumption of yoga. And one thing I'm quite interested in is the representations and the relationship between practitioners and consumers of yoga in Japan and the Indian state in terms of banal nationalism and things like this, which is what I've been working on the last couple of years, is these tacit threads between the social worlds of Hindu supremacists and how this is weaved into the narratives of global yoga and its consumption. So, yeah, next year. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is parts of my PhD research. And the main question that I had was, how is legitimacy acquired, negotiated, contested, and expressed within the transglobal yoga industry? So I took a social realist philosophy, and I used an analytical method called legitimation code theory, which is a combination of Bernstein's code theory and Bourdieu's field theory. So I'm not going to explain any more of the theory of that. I'll leave that up to you. So I took the perspective that knowledge is real and it has real consequences for people. And so I was quite interested in how people gain access to this knowledge. What is the knowledge that is created and justified within this particular epistemic community? And I'll explain this, who or what this community is. So I'll talk about how to become a śāntamūrti. I spent 15 months in this community, this ashram, this cloistered monastery, you can say. And so Shanti Mandir means Temple of Peace, and it was founded in 1986, so it's a new religious movement. And it's a result of a schism that happened in the earlier 80s of another organization called Siddha Yoga, which you may have heard of, so Bhabamuktananda's Siddha Yoga. Shanti Mandir certainly do not identify as a neo-religious movement, or in fact being neo-Hindu. Within this kind of academic category, they identify with what they would argue is an eternal tradition. So śāntamūrti is an adjectival compound from the Sanskrit language, and it basically means the personification of tranquility. And I'll explain how I came to use this as a theoretical frame. Shanta, as the quintessence of rasa, points to a mode of being in and enjoying the world that remains grounded in transcendence. So I would argue that basically the reason people come is to re-enchant their disenchanted lives. They believe that the guru and the lifestyle that he promotes, the knowledge that he offers, will help them to relieve their existential doubt and anxiety in the world. This idea of rasa is quite important. This essentially is an aesthetic theory within Sanskrit literature and performance, and this is where I was looking for a conceptual bridge between modern epistemological ideas and, you can say, ancient ones from the Sanskrit episteme. So I had fun playing around with ideas in that regard. So this is where I did my field work on the west coast of India, about 4 hours north of Mumbai, just outside the city of Valsad, which has about 70,000 people in it. You see here, this is where the ashram is. It's only a kilometre or so from the coast to the Arabian Sea, and it's quite green. This district is full of mangoes, coconuts, chiku sapoti, and rice. And the ashram itself is a 20-acre property that has 100-year-old mango trees in it, hundreds of them in fact. In this district here there are 17 different castes, of which I think 3 of them are landowning castes, so it's an interesting place. So there's all these different hamlets, you can say, and the ashram itself is essentially a hermetically sealed hamlet of its own. So, a bit more shameless self-promotion. I made a film as part of my PhD, a documentary. You can find it on YouTube or on my website, and it's a day in our ashram, so feel free to have a look at that if you want to know more about life in the ashram. Part of my research, I did a fair bit of discourse analysis to look at the legitimizing strategies and the marketing rhetoric of this community. And I found it quite fascinating how this organization is the result of a schism, and so how they reinterpreted that whole cataclysmic event that happened in the mid-80s. And so this guy here is the current guru and founder, Swami Nityananda. This is Baba Muktananda, his guru. And this guy is Bhagwan Nityananda, who is the grandfather guru. And what I did here, this is the e-publication. And so using this corpus linguistic software, I analysed about a decade's worth of his public discourses that he's given us and that they've digitised. And this is what I found out. Muktananda, so the guru's guru, and guru, these are the items that were most often mentioned, and I think it's quite indicative of where the education that's available heads, in the sense that it's all about this idea of guru bhakti, or devotion to the guru. And you see here that yoga, in a sense, it's not really mentioned all that often. This is about 10 years worth of this e-publication that comes out 2 or 3 times a year. And here is one representative page from it. The Guru Gita means the Guru's song, and it's their principal devotional text. And this is one verse from it, and it sounds like this. Brahmanandam paramasukadam kevalam śāntamūrtim dvandvātītam gaganasadrisham tattvamasyādi laksham ekam nityam vimalamachalam sarvadi sakshibhutam bhavātītam triganarahitam sadgurum tam namami. This verse basically justifies the institution of gurudom and explains that the guru is perfect and it can't do any wrong, and that's why you should have a guru. And so, Hatha Yoga, I don't know how much you know about yoga, but there are many types. But Hatha Yoga, first mention of it's about the 11th century. It peaks in the 15th, 16th centuries. Hatha Yoga is the stretchy stuff. Okay, there's all different types of yoga, but Hatha Yoga is the stretchy stuff. And Shanti Mandir, 20 years ago, they had no interest in promoting the postural yoga. Their idea of yoga is much more holistic. To them, Hatha Yoga is just one aspect of a more important holistic lifestyle. So it's quite interesting. But they get involved with International Yoga Day, as you can see, and here's some of their senior yoga teachers. But Shanti Mandir are actually a non-profit organisation. There's a global network of thousands of people from just about every continent. So this is their website, shantimandir.com. And so they rely on the generous donations of their social network to essentially invest economic capital to help with their charitable works. And one of them is a Sanskrit college, which is inside the ashram. So most of the people that live in the ashram are students at the Sanskrit college. So my master's field work was basically focused on code switching between spoken Sanskrit and Hindi. So I was looking at where people spoke Sanskrit, when would they switch to Hindi, what were the topic markers and things like this. But they have a bunch of other charitable stuff. So Shanti Mandir is an epistemic community. It's a socio-psychological entity that creates and justifies knowledge. So, like I said at the start, I was interested to know what exactly is the knowledge that's created and how is it justified. And the answer is that it's śāntamūrti. That's the end of the line, basically. And so I base this on the Guru is considered to be an ideal knower who enables acquisition of legitimacy as an authentic member of this yogically inspired epistemic community. And the way I started to look at that is through this idea of a cultivated gaze. So you have this expanding range of dispositions. So people come from all around the world. But through the ideal knower's gaze, through his discourse, they're entrained into what you can appreciate is the ashram habitus. Now, so this cultivated gaze basically ends up with this default habitus. But then you have this social gaze that refracts essentially through different standpoint theories of gender, ethnicity, class, caste, education level, things like this, into these different groups. So that's what I'm going to talk about now, is how I played with a grounded theoretical approach to understand the objective social relations. So here is a picture from the main temple. Here you have the Guru, Nityananda, and in the middle of the temple there's a big fire pit, and here are some of the senior students that are helping him. The ritual calendar is quite complicated, it's quite busy, and so there's always some fire ceremony happening, like at the full moon or the Guru's birthday, or there's, in fact, the average time spent in the temple would be probably 4 or 5 hours every day. This is the main thing that they do. They go to the temple, they chant, and they hear about how to be better people, more or less, from the Guru. Here's some more pictures. So this is the Guru there. This is one of the students. He essentially gave a talk about how being in the ashram, with the Guru, has changed his life and how he wants to devote himself to that. This is the Bhagavan Nityananda statue being ritually bathed in the morning. And here are some more statues as well. So satsaṅga is a religious pedagogical domain that uses performative technologies to suggest an alternate reality and the necessary disposition required to share in the Guru's divya dṛṣṭi, or divine vision. A meaning is created through producing an aesthetic, which is a collection of propositions or suggestions. But it's also cultivated through effect. So I would argue quite strongly that the educational system within this community, and many like it, is disintellectual and it's irrational. You're not taught how to think critically. You're taught how to feel, and you're taught how to fall in line. So ultimately, how to become a śāntamūrti and gain legitimacy as a knower of this in this community is to emulate the Guru's disposition. So this is what the temple looks like from above. And you can see already, starting from the Guru, that there's a hierarchy that forms with the other renunciants, the teachers of the Sanskrit college, then the students, and then you have the male and female devotees that are split. So you can't just go sit anywhere you want. But this is the thing, and your identity is set for you. Oops, wrong button. So this is what happens. At the end of all the ceremonies, at the end of all of the public discourses, there's a thing called dṛṣṭi. And so people line up, split by gender, and they do this zigzag circuit, like the stations of the cross, and pranam in front of all the different statues and the guru. But you can't just go up at any time. There's a sequence, and that's based on various groupings. So you could look at the hierarchies here in a kind of linear way like this, based on knowledge: the guru, the Sanskrit ritual specialists, the renunciants, and then the patrons. You could also look at it from a center-periphery relation to purity: guru, renunciants, scholars, patrons. But I think a more productive way to look at it is it's like a three-sided triangle. So these different groups, they actually invest different species of capital, and they're only allowed to invest different specific species of capital. And at a symbolic level, you can't compete with members of the other group for recognition. So you can only, as a patron, you can only compete with other patrons. If you wanted to dress up and walk around and pretend that you were a scholar, it's just not going to work. So this is how I started to look at it. These different groups invest different types of capital. But then you have this other interesting group of staff that have an even more intimate association through administration to the guru. So basically, your physical proximity to the guru is a quite significant marker of achievement. But just to finish, so to kind of qualify a śāntamūrti, sure. Like I said, I looked at the Sanskrit literary theory related to perception, audience reception, and performance, and things like this. To look at an ontological and an epistemological components to the śāntamūrti, and I'll just finish by explaining these quickly. And I base this on this comment that I've heard the Guru say many times, that we must develop big hearts and minds. So I thought about it. So I took this epistemic component to be sakshin, and the ontological component to be a sahṛdaya. So the sakshin is and rasa nishpati are fundamental epistemological principles of Advaita Vedanta philosophy related to aesthetic rapture. Yeah. So Advaita Vedanta is the principal philosophy of this group. So that's where I went with that. And the sahṛdaya concept comes from śāntarasavāda, which is the doctrine of the appreciation of tranquility, you can say. These are terms that the Guru uses quite often. But yeah, it's interesting. So people don't necessarily think in this formal theoretical way. But if you talk about it and these concepts with them, they go, of course, that's what we're trying to do. So just to finish, to become a śāntamūrti, one must invest the legitimate species of capital assigned to their group, learn primarily through observation how to emulate the Guru's disposition, and cultivate big hearts and minds. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions?
Yeah, Muktananda, you mentioned his name. I actually met him.
Oh, really?
In Melbourne.
Right.
In it would have been the 70s. I was sort of 12, 13. And went to a number of their sessions. And he named me, he gave me a name.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I wanted to know what his position is now with this group. I mean, what happened in 1986? So my understanding was that after he died, which was what,
82, yeah.
So there were like two?
Yeah, so I initially was going to tell you a bit more history about all that stuff, but, time restraints, so I'm glad you asked. In 1982, just before Muktananda died, he named two successors, the brother and sister, right? So Nityananda and his older sister Chidvalisananda. By 1985, this is when he was forced to abdicate. He left the organization amidst a lot of controversy. I won't go into the details, but it's typical guru stuff, you can say. And they haven't spoken since 1985. There is no mention at all on Shanti Mandir's websites or their official literature of Siddha Yoga, and vice versa. From time to time, Nityananda will talk about that period, and it becomes a very interesting thing. And within the groups of devotees, if you met Muktananda, you know, the amount of times people talk about, oh, I met him, you know, kind of thing. Or if people never met him, go, I met him in my meditation. Or, it's interesting how focused, it's all about Muktananda, who's a very controversial, charismatic, self-styled tantric god-man. That's how the literature basically defines him. Yeah, so they don't talk about it, but there are still today in the Indian courts legal battles that have been going on for 30 years. Yeah, so, but Muktananda is clearly central to both Siddha Yoga and Shanti Mandir today.
Yeah, but I noticed, like, I looked up the website, you're not really mentioned that. His name doesn't appear.
The Shanti Mandir.
I couldn't find it.
Oh yeah, if you go to like about, and then it gives a little kind of paragraph about each guru. Yeah.
So what are you going to do in Japan?
Yeah, okay, I'm glad you asked. So I work within the field of yoga studies, you can say, and I've spent the better part of the last 4 or 5 years looking at the global consumption of yoga. And within the field of yoga studies, there's literally nothing written about yoga in East Asia. It's all about North America, Western Europe. And so there's a huge gap in what we understand. So when I applied for the JSPS fellowship, I found some mention that Japan was the fastest growing yoga industry in the world. But there's nothing written about it, so it's quite interesting. Yoga, millions of people do yoga around the world, and it's still growing. It's worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Within the global wellness industry is worth trillions of dollars. And a lot of people take yoga quite seriously, so I'm looking at it through a serious leisure kind of lens. So what I will do principally, the ethnographic component is based in Kyoto, and it will extend it into other areas of Kansai and hopefully to other areas of Japan. But I will essentially embed myself within a few different yoga communities, yoga studios, and try and understand exactly what yoga means to consumers of yoga lifestyles in Japan.
Can I just follow the question up? Because I have only attended one yoga class ever in Japan. It was just the other day.
Right.
And there were people who were in the class who were very involved, like you say, but the person who was teaching it was Nepali.
Right, okay.
And and she had a very distinctive way of doing it.
Sure.
So what I was wondering is that going to be something you'll look at, the variety?
Absolutely. I hope to document as much as I can about yoga in Japan, the different styles, the different styles. I think there's like 7,000 registered yoga teachers in Japan or something. I think I've found out. There's so much to know, and unfortunately, I've only just arrived, so I can't say much. But so I'll do.
She did do a bit of singing.
Right. Yeah. So this is quite interesting because in some studio.
Or chanting.
Yeah, chant. They're all basically. You can look at it. The basic typology of modern yoga is modern soteriological yoga and modern postural yoga. So the hot yoga and all this stuff won't do any chanting. It's all about exercise and sweating and all this, right? The soteriological yoga is very much what Shanti Mandir is. It's about salvation essentially. ultimately, and chanting plays a big part in that because Sanskrit is considered to be the Deva Bhasha, the language of the gods, and it's meant to have some, vitalistic power to reform lives and things like that. So chanting, it just depends on the studio that you go to, how involved they are. And something that's been happening, I've noticed more and more, is chanting the kirtana, that stuff I showed you. This is becoming even more involved in general yoga schools throughout the world. So when before, a lot of people, they don't want to chant, they don't want anything to do with it, which is fair enough, I think. So.
Okay,
anyway,
thank you very much.
coffee time, huh?
Coffee time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.